After all the fear, the fighting.
It's a death like no other. A young woman's body is found at the bottom of a garbage chute in a luxury Melbourne apartment complex.
I just couldn't believe it.
The death of 24-year-old Phoebe Handsjuk is one of the city's most bizarre cases. But was it an accident, suicide, or murder?
Someone going down a garbage chute would have rung alarm bells.
To police, it's suicide.
Don't be too upset because this girl killed herself.
A coroner decides it's a freak accident.
Just seems to be absolutely off the planet.
But her family asks, was someone else involved?
It's the bizarre nature of her death that makes people absolutely say, how could this have happened?
Tonight,
the door closes back on you at the same time as you're getting pushed in.
we conduct the test that is central to the case the police failed to do.
It certainly does look like an incredibly difficult feat to achieve.
Look at the evidence that was ignored.
There was a broken glass on the floor, there were blood stains.
As our experts ask,
He was able to control her fall.
how did Phoebe die?
I don't believe that Phoebe put herself into the rubbish chute.
The last thing you'd be doing would be saying, oh, right, this is a suicide.
The mystery of the girl in the chute. Good evening, I'm Liz Hayes, and this is Under Investigation. Joining me, the Honourable Anthony Wheely QC, former Supreme Court judge and one of Australia's leading barristers. In Melbourne, Roland Legg, former Victoria Police Homicide Squad Detective Senior Sergeant. Lorne Campbell, Phoebe's grandfather, a retired detective sergeant who exposed the police flaws in his granddaughter's case. And from Brisbane, Professor Belinda Carpenter from the Queensland University of Technology and an expert in coronial investigations. Thank you all very much for joining me. The strange death of 24-year-old Phoebe Handsjuk baffled police and left her family in utter disbelief. Why, they asked, would anyone choose to plummet from the 12th floor down a garbage chute? When you were told that Phoebe had put herself into a garbage chute, what was your reaction to that?
I was devastated. I just couldn't believe it. I thought, why would she do something like that? If someone had told me that Phoebe had been found dead because she'd taken, you know, an overdose or something, that would have been more believable, but not that way. It's not the way anyone would choose to take their life, you know, and particularly not her.
Phoebe's mother, Natalie Handsjuk, is still searching for answers because her daughter's tragic death is totally at odds with the child she knew. How would you have described her?
From the beginning, Phoebe was a live wire, you could say. As a baby, she was a happy little baby and an old soul, you could say, right from the start. She was my firstborn child. We lived in a beautiful home with a fabulous garden. There were trees to climb, roofs to climb, all sorts of fun to be had.
3 months before she died, Phoebe wrote a poem for her grandmother's funeral.
After all the fear, the fighting, after all, strength gave way to final rest, a place to lay your weary head. Your body strong but heavy as lead. Never faltered in generous step, your arms held wide to those who needed compassion, a little warmth inside.
She was only 24, beautiful, adventurous and creative. She had longed for a career in the arts. Her journals were filled with drawings and poetry. And she loved being with her family. Her mother Natalie, father Len, and her brothers Nicolay and Tom were all very close. But when her parents divorced, she suffered depression and turned to drugs and alcohol. At the time of her death, Phoebe was living with 43-year-old Aunt Hampel in a relationship that seemed to have almost run its course. He was much older.
He was much older, yes. I thought, because of the differences in the way that they were, I felt as though it wasn't a relationship that was going to last very long.
On December 2nd, 2010, Phoebe is alone at the home she still shared with Aunt Hampel in Melbourne's luxury Valencia apartments. When a fire alarm sounds, she leaves the building with her dog at 11:44 a.m, but returns 6 minutes later. In the following hours, she drinks enough to put her 3 times over the legal driving limit. Traces of a sleeping pill will also be found in her system. At some stage, Phoebe leaves the apartment and goes to the rubbish room on the 12th floor and enters the garbage chute. Why and how is unknown. All that is certain is that at some time before 7 p.m, her short life comes to an end at the bottom of that garbage chute. She's plunged 40 metres down, landing in a wheelie bin. Incredibly, she survives, but her right foot is almost severed by the compactor's blade. Phoebe's jeans are around her knees, her belt unbuckled, her sunglasses by her side. In a last bid for life, she drags herself around the room seeking the exit, before dying alone in pitch darkness amid other people's garbage. But how and why did she get in the garbage chute through an opening barely 20 centimetres wide before falling down a narrow steel tube? It's the question our experts will investigate tonight. One of the difficulties is understanding in all of this is why was Phoebe at the chute?
Yes, it's the crux of it. I mean, it's the bizarre nature of her death that makes people absolutely say, how could this have happened? The answer to that's really difficult. It may have been suicide. It may have been some type of misadventure. There may have been third-party involvement.
Coming up,
Bruising on their arms and wrists.
the mystery of Phoebe's final hours.
She raised her finger to her lips to silence me.
The detective in you said this never looked right. Key evidence of possible foul play ignored.
Did the police ever conduct that sort of experiment themselves?
No, they didn't.
That's next on Under Investigation. Musical, artistic, and only 24 years old, Phoebe Handsjuk had a world of promise ahead of her. But on an early December night in 2010, her vibrant life ended in a way that seems to defy all reasonable explanation. Her body was found at around 7 p.m. at the bottom of a garbage chute in the apartment block where she was living with her partner, Aunt Hampel. He had arrived home to find Phoebe's handbag on the kitchen counter, along with her apartment keys and security swipe card. But their home was in disarray.
In the apartment itself, there were items that suggested that there may have been a fight. There was a broken glass on the floor, there were blood stains, there was a cushion that was ripped apart.
Despite the bizarre circumstances of her death, it seems police quickly decided Phoebe had committed suicide. It was also the view of Aunt Hampel, which he expressed to police on the night Phoebe was found.
The idea of the suicide planted itself in the police's mind at an early stage. I find it very interesting. Certainly one factor was that Aunt Hampel, her boyfriend, said to the police that night he thought that because of her depression and alcohol abuse that she had taken her own life. And that would have implanted itself quite heavily in the minds of the police who were there.
There's no doubt Phoebe was troubled at the time of her death. Her relationship with the much older Aunt Hampel, a music promoter and the son of a former Supreme Court judge, was difficult and at times fraught. A coronial inquest into Phoebe's death would hear that after an argument, Aunt Hampel had called Phoebe 27 times.
Well, we now know that her psychologist had cited that she felt unequal in the relationship.
Yeah, definitely. I think in all sorts of ways she felt that. I think because of the age difference, that would have been a big part of it. He was much more experienced, he was more confident. She was just really starting out in life at 24. The one time that I did go up to the apartment, I said to Phoebe, "Where are you here?" And she just sort of shrugged and said, "Oh, Aunt doesn't like my things here because he doesn't like a mess."
She used to say that nothing she did satisfied him. She always felt as though she was wanting in the relationship, so she wasn't quite good enough.
In the weeks prior to her death, Phoebe had sought to leave the relationship 4 times. But on each occasion, after speaking with Aunt, she moved back to the apartment.
I think she felt quite divided in terms of her commitment and her love for the family and also needing to keep him happy.
In the days leading up to her death, had you picked up on anything at all?
Yeah, I picked up there was something going on. And then on the Sunday night before she died, I had a conversation with her on Skype, and she was in a darkened room. She was back at the apartment, so I said, "Oh, so you've patched everything up with Aunt. Are things better with Aunt?" And she raised her finger to her lips to silence me, and so I didn't say any more, but I knew that she didn't want to talk about it.
Despite struggling with her relationship, Phoebe had plans, and she was looking forward to her brother's 18th birthday. She was not, her family says, suicidal. At 7 p.m, Phoebe's body was found by a female concierge at the luxury Balencia building. At around 8 p.m, police arrived at the scene. Less than 2 hours later, at around 9:40 p.m, when police spoke to the concierge, it seemed they'd already made up their minds as to what had happened.
A plainclothes police officer actually approached the concierge, who was terribly distressed that night, obviously after having found Phoebe, to say, "Don't be too upset because this girl killed herself. She took her own life." At 9 o'clock on the night that Phoebe died, a police officer made that comment to the concierge.
Lorne, right from the very beginning, the detective in you said that this never looked right.
I thought it would have been something that would have occurred to the police at the time. I thought that would have been something that they'd say, "Well, we've got to test this," because it looked so improbable.
For Phoebe's grandfather, Lorne Campbell, the central question to the entire mystery of his granddaughter's death is it physically possible for a young woman to climb into a garbage chute unassisted?
The whole thing, walking into that place as a policeman and seeing something so utterly bizarre as someone going down a garbage chute, would have rung alarm bells. The last thing you'd be doing, the last thing I'd be doing would be saying, oh, right, this is a suicide. To think of suicide, intended person, choosing a rubbish chute to go down just seems to be absolutely off the planet.
The police suicide theory not only assumed Phoebe was able to get into the garbage chute without assistance, but also while under the influence of alcohol and the sleeping pill Stilnox. A toxicology report showed Phoebe had been drinking on the day of her death and had taken Stilnox. Her blood alcohol level was 0.16, 3 times the legal limit. But the amount of Stilnox in her system was determined to be around the normal therapeutic dose. Was she drunk?
Yes, I would say she was definitely affected by alcohol, and if one assumed that the combination of alcohol and Stilnox created a very drowsy state, how could she have climbed into this chute unassisted?
Well, Lorne, I think you would say that you knew your granddaughter, you knew that under the influence of alcohol, she was quite clumsy, I think.
She didn't tolerate alcohol at all well. She was quite fond of it, but it wasn't terribly fond of her, and she lost her motor skills very quickly. And of course, the Stilnox wouldn't have helped that. It would have made it worse, if anything.
Coming up, the key to the entire mystery.
I'm just trying to see what I can hold on to.
Is it physically possible?
Did the police ever conduct that sort of experiment themselves?
No, they didn't.
We conduct the test.
There are just a lot of strange contradictions that don't seem to have been pursued.
The police failed to do.
So many little things that did suggest perhaps third-party involvement.
That's next on Under Investigation. Police investigating the bizarre death of Phoebe Handsjuk quickly came to the conclusion she had taken her own life by plunging 40 metres down the garbage chute of her apartment building. And they formed that opinion without seeing whether it was even possible, especially for someone affected by the sleeping pills Stilnox and alcohol, which Phoebe had in her system that night. So, to see what it would take to get into the chute, we've set up an exact replica of the 12th floor garbage chute in Phoebe's building. This is the test that the police failed to do. Our stand-in, Danielle, is the same height and weight as Phoebe and wearing similar clothes. The only difference is Danielle is sober.
Wow, it's very small.
And right from the beginning, Danielle is struggling.
Okay, I'm just trying to see what I can hold on to. There's not much around.
The chute is 1 metre from the ground and only 22 centimetres wide when open.
It's very tight. Oh.
Can I get you out?
Yeah.
Danielle's weight on the top lip of the door causes the limiting bolts to come out of their position, forcing the door to fall backwards, trapping her legs. With the door back this far, the chute entry is virtually closed.
Okay. It's very tight.
In her second attempt, Danielle pulls herself up, but it takes all her strength, balance and coordination.
Oh, all right, okay. It's very tight. It's very, very tight.
Keep going.
It's closing on me. It's a...
And with limited movement, Danielle can only slide down the chute with her arms above her head, a detail that will be of later interest to our experts. It's also almost impossible for anyone to enter the chute head first.
That indeed was a struggle, Lorne.
I'm shaking
Well
now.
done, well done.
That's very scary.
And if you're unsteady on your feet and you're affected by still knocks, you're almost in a sleepwalking state. Danielle, can I ask you, how could you have done that?
I don't think that would be possible. I'm shaking as it is now, and I'm sober. So far out. I'm very, very scary, very tight. And
What was the difficult part about it? What was the hardest part there?
I think the way that the door closes back on you at the same time as you're getting pushed in. You don't have any room to move.
Of course, the door has got a really strong return spring. If I let that go,
Yeah, all that weight just shuts back.
it sort of shuts almost like a door in a wind.
For our panel, this demonstration reinforces doubt that Phoebe, in an intoxicated state, could have put herself into the chute.
It was a very difficult operation for a fit young person to do, and I imagine it would be so much more difficult for a person who was affected by alcohol and drugs.
I mean, it certainly does look like an incredibly difficult feat to achieve, to be honest.
One of the major problems, apart from the dimensions, is the door comes up against your lower back and virtually jams you in. Trying to manoeuvre yourself then is not helped by the fact there's really nothing, as Danielle found, to grip onto. And on top of that, whatever Phoebe had in her system at the time.
Lorne Campbell, a former detective, had already conducted his own test and knew how difficult it was for his granddaughter to get into the chute. But police never did, a missing part of their investigation that was perhaps needed before they made their almost immediate decision that Phoebe had committed suicide.
Judge Wheely, were you surprised that the police didn't run that test?
Yes, I am really quite surprised. I mean, I think it certainly warranted that they conduct the experiment themselves to see whether they were right in their hypothesis.
Homicide Squad detectives initially investigated Phoebe's death, but within 5 days passed the case to detectives from the South Melbourne police station. Their swift conclusion that Phoebe had committed suicide may explain the glaring oversights in their investigation of the scene. The first and perhaps most critical was their failure to secure all CCTV footage from Phoebe's apartment block on the night of her death.
When you find that there is available CCTV, then you grab it straight away and
Well, they only got 3 of the 14 cameras, I think, ultimately.
Yes, well, someone within the police was told on the night by the manager that the product was recorded over every 2 days. Now, that would, I would have thought, encourage you to grab it as soon as you possibly could to make sure that it was all fully preserved.
18 months later, when police tried to collect the hard drive of the building's CCTV footage, they were told it could not be found. But police also didn't take computers from the apartment. When her family were able to access Phoebe's computer, they say all her outgoing emails had been deleted. And one of the 2 mobile phones Phoebe used simply vanished.
She had 2 phones. She had an iPhone and a Nokia phone. And the Nokia phone, extraordinarily, has never been produced. It's never been located since that night.
Judge Wheely believes the police investigation was left wanting, and mainly because it appears police remained focused on their one belief, that Phoebe had committed suicide.
It just shows the danger of making assumptions when you haven't done the investigatory work to justify those findings. And there are many others that I think really affected the findings that were made.
There are just a lot of strange contradictions that don't seem to have been pursued, and I believe they should have been. These things are basic.
Yeah, I shake my head, do you?
I would like more to have been done. The first 24 to 48 hours in an investigation are crucial.
There were other police misses. 2 glasses on the kitchen bench were not dusted for fingerprints, nor were their contents tested. The coroner surmised that it was the broken glass that Phoebe had gone to the garbage chute to dispose of, but no such glass was ever found amongst the rubbish. He also decided that while clearing the broken glass in the apartment, Phoebe had cut herself, which explained the blood inside the apartment. Yet no blood or fingerprints were found on the entry hatch to the garbage chute. And Judge Wheely believes there were other important checks that police failed to do.
I think that the evidence that was marshalled left a great gap there as to whether we could find a real possibility that there was third-party involvement. There was certainly material that pointed that way. There was some bruising and damage to Phoebe's body, which immediately suggested somebody might have inflicted that upon her rather than as part of the injuries she sustained in the fall. Bruising and marks on the back of her arms and her neck and her temple more or less went unexplained.
It was evidence Phoebe's grandfather, Lorne Campbell, who is a former detective, had also noted.
Bruising on their arms and wrists were small ovoid bruises, which were consistent with them being gripped by someone.
There are a couple of other things, if I can mention. She had her sunglasses with her as she went down that chute, it seems, and her jeans were around her legs at the bottom. Is there anything to take from that?
Well, it was a feature that might have suggested third-party involvement, but was never really explored as far as I can see. And I don't think the police checked whether the apartment door was locked or unlocked at the time. So many little things that did suggest perhaps third-party involvement.
And finally, without having tested the possibility, police stated they believed it was easier for Phoebe to have climbed into the chute than being pushed down by someone else while unconscious.
Lorne, just reading the detective's report to the coroner, he says, "I have inspected the hatch myself, and the degree of difficulty would be far greater in placing an unconscious person through the hatch." Do you agree or disagree with that?
No, I totally disagree with that, and in fact proved that it was very easy.
Lorne was able to demonstrate in the studio, with someone lifting our stand-in Danielle into the chute, how much easier it could be.
You saw that too, Roland.
Yes, I watched it with our assistant Danielle over the shoulder of a tall male, and he was able to control her fall with one arm and at the same time have total control of that flap opening with the other, and she just slid straight through.
And as far as you know, did the police ever conduct that sort of experiment themselves or not?
No, they didn't.
It's hard to believe that the police investigation didn't hamper the evidence gathered to enable the coroner to make his decision.
Coming up,
We were completely dumbfounded.
the inquest into Phoebe's death.
All of those things made that particular theory of the coroner unlikely.
The outcome that shocked her family.
It's sort of in the face of all the evidence, isn't it?
Yes.
That's next on Under Investigation. In March 2013, 3 years after the baffling death of 24-year-old Phoebe Handsjuk at the bottom of a garbage chute, her family was told there would be a coronial inquest. They saw it as a chance for evidence that had been missed or overlooked to be re-examined. But Ant Hampel, Phoebe's partner, opposed the inquest. His lawyers argued the evidence was not enough to suggest homicide. Do you know why he was adamant that there should not be an inquest?
No, I don't. They were convinced that she'd killed herself, so.
And as far as police were concerned, the reason for Phoebe's death was clear.
The detective's report to the coroner said, "I can see nothing to indicate to me that any other person was involved in the death. That is to say, no person participated in her death other than herself." And that was a big claim to make before the inquest had even started.
The inquest took 14 days. Coroner Peter White heard from 30 witnesses and reviewed thousands of pages of evidence. It was an enormous task, but Coroner White had a counsel to assist him, a senior Melbourne barrister, Deborah Simensma. Having also examined all the evidence, it's normal practice that a counsel assisting makes a recommendation on what the findings should be.
What Ms. Simensma provided ultimately was a 65-page submission which examined every facet of the evidence in a way that I haven't seen before. It was absolutely extraordinary tour de force. And that submission was, as the family really, I think, expected it to be, that there should be an open finding.
Miss Simensma believed there was not enough evidence to establish whether Phoebe's death was accidental or deliberate. In recommending an open finding, it meant the case could be re-investigated in the future. But Coroner White disregarded Miss Simensma's recommendation.
There was some tension between counsel assisting and the coroner.
Roland, you said you've never had a situation where the counsel assisting has disagreed with the coroner?
No, I haven't.
The coroner really made no reference to counsel assisting submissions in the end and completely departed from what her overall submission was.
Instead, Coroner White handed down a finding that Phoebe had met her death by misadventure. It was, he said, a tragic accident.
And you observed the counsel assisting in this process?
When that finding was delivered, she visibly paled and she walked out of the court looking quite stunned. She obviously made no comment, but it was written all over her face that she couldn't believe it either.
We were completely dumbfounded when we heard that finding, when he handed that down.
Will you accept it was an accident?
I think I'd rather not comment on that. I feel a bit numb at the moment, to be honest.
Disbelief. Absolute disbelief. It was against the evidence.
According to coronial expert Professor Belinda Carpenter, coroners will sometimes choose a finding of misadventure rather than suicide to lessen the trauma on families.
There's very few open findings in the coronial jurisdiction, but I think in this case, my opinion is probably that suicide was also on the table, and I think that the coroner probably felt that misadventure was a kinder outcome for the family.
But that's it's sort of in the face of all the evidence, isn't it?
Yes.
Deborah Simensma's wasn't the only opinion Coroner White seemed to differ with. He suggested that the combination of the sleeping pill still knocks and alcohol in Phoebe's system had made her oblivious to the danger and essentially caused her to sleepwalk into the chute.
I think that in this case, Coroner White certainly did become very convinced by this idea of the Stilnox. Her having taken Stilnox certainly became a focus for his finding.
This was despite evidence from toxicologist Professor Naren Gunja that the act of climbing into a garbage chute did not match the usual side effects of Stilnox, also known as zolpidem.
Most of the side effects are acts that people do on a regular basis, such as the sleepwalking, sleep talking, sleep eating, and the sleep cleaning. The act of going to a garbage chute and getting into it is not something that people would do on a daily basis, if ever in their life. So my view was at the time, and still is that the ingestion of zolpidem and alcohol together were going to make the entry of Phoebe into that garbage chute less likely.
It's a view supported by Judge Wheely after examining the testimony of 2 other toxicologists who also gave evidence at the inquest.
The alcohol and drugs would have significantly impaired Phoebe's ability to enter the chute unassisted. So it's difficult to see that all of that evidence, when you put it together, gave a satisfactory springboard for the Stilnox theory finally espoused by the learned coroner.
Coroner White also made the assumption that Phoebe, once in the chute, had attempted to control her fall. But in our test, the only way Danielle, our stand-in, could pass through the chute was with her arms above her head. In that position, it would have been impossible for Phoebe to slow her fall if she had been conscious. Yet, the coroner believes she did.
He very specifically claimed that she had retarded her fall once she got into the shaft. Now, you can't get into that chute with your arms by your sides, for a start. And that means you've got your arms way above your head, and to exert pressure on the sides of the shaft in that position would be absolutely impossible. You couldn't do it.
4 expert witnesses also stated there was no evidence that Phoebe had attempted to control her fall. But again, it was evidence disregarded by the coroner.
And there was no evidence from her hands, arms or clothing to suggest that she was covered with dirt, as she would have to be if she'd been trying to retard her fall. So all of those things made that particular theory of the coroner, I would say, unlikely.
Well, I mean, for the layman, you look at this and you think there's a whole lot of information that didn't make it and should have made it, that wasn't presented.
Well, you know, I think everyone around the table is of the opinion that it probably was a difficult call. The more appropriate call would have been an open finding.
In the end, as well as finding that Phoebe's death was a tragic accident, Coroner White made one other significant finding, one specifically requested by lawyers for Ant Hampel, that he be exonerated of any responsibility for Phoebe's death. Judge Wheely, is that common?
Well, the way this inquest panned out, because of the intervention of a very experienced lawyer appearing for Mr. Hampel, it was heading in the direction, I don't blame the coroner for this, heading in the direction of being as much about exonerating Ant Hampel as it was about finding the true circumstances of Phoebe's death.
Well, in his finding, I thought that there was only one person that really benefited, and that was Ant Hampel, because he was exonerated from any involvement.
There is no suggestion that Ant Hampel was in any way involved in Phoebe's death. But if the coroner had made an open finding, it would have left all possibilities, murder, suicide and misadventure, still on the table.
Come back and change the past, gotta let it go.
We didn't anticipate that we would have had anything other than an open finding, because so much evidence was lost. That's what we'd hoped for, and it was all we thought we'd ever get. Because I don't believe that Phoebe put herself into the rubbish chute. I don't believe that it was an accidental death. I feel... I think that somebody put her in there.
Coming up,
This investigation was hampered from the start.
an inquest without answers
Justice was not properly served.
and a family left with nowhere to turn.
People like us have no recall. We can't fight something that's so obviously wrong.
We're certainly not ever going to let go of it.
That's next on Under Investigation. When Coroner White handed down his finding that Phoebe Handsjuk's death was the result of a tragic accident, her family was devastated and disbelieving. An incomplete police investigation and a coronial finding that Phoebe's family refused to accept, and one that was not recommended by the counsel assisting the coroner. It left many unsettled and, more importantly, a finding that was virtually unchallengeable.
Once the coroner has made his findings, at that point, you were pretty stuck, weren't you? There was not much else you could do at that point.
No, there wasn't. The only way that we could appeal his finding was if we could prove that he had made an error of law in the finding. It's very difficult to ever, in this state, appeal a coroner's finding.
Incredibly, the Handsjuk family have little option but to live with the coroner's official recorded finding that this was a tragic accident caused by Phoebe. Judge Wheely, has justice been done?
I mean, the truth is we can't always know the full truth of a death. And this case, maybe more bizarrely than anyone I've come across, certainly falls into that pattern. My view, on balance in this case, is that justice was not properly served.
I might just say, if Phoebe had died, for example, in New South Wales in exactly the same circumstances, the family could have appealed. They don't need any reason to appeal an inquest.
So in the light of our investigation tonight, let's look again at the coronial conclusion as to how Phoebe Handsjuk died. It goes like this. Sleepwalking under the influence of alcohol and the sleeping pill still knocks, Phoebe goes to the garbage chute carrying a rubbish bag that has never been found, containing a glass she has broken earlier, but leaves other broken pieces in the apartment. Reaching the garbage room in her semi-conscious state, Phoebe climbs into the chute, yet does not leave any blood and fingerprints on the chute entry. How does that stack up, Judge Wheely?
It's my view that that conclusion was really beyond the evidence and the weight of evidence. And I think in the context where a beautiful, vibrant, albeit troubled young girl has her life ended at the age of 24, that is not satisfactory. And I query whether the interest of justice has been properly served by the process.
Professor Carpenter?
This investigation was hampered from the start. It is a real issue of justice. I think that in this case, the family were not given closure, despite, I think, Coroner White's best intentions to do that. It's certainly clear that that was not the case.
And Lorne Campbell, where do you go from here? What do you do?
Well, I guess we just hope that someone out there who has some knowledge of this is going to feel a bit of a pang of conscience and come forward. We're certainly not ever going to let go of it.
Roland, what new evidence would you think could force this case back open?
Or a confession? It'd have to be new and compelling evidence, but it's still possible. Any solid, compelling evidence to support suicide, misadventure or murder.
Last time
hope you now have found a place of peace, kindness and tenderness.
The only practical way that the case into how Phoebe died can be reopened is a new police investigation. And for that to happen, there would have to be compelling new evidence or a witness who has so far stayed in the shadows. It's the one frail hope Phoebe Handsjuk clings to.
I think this whole fight has always been to have justice for Phoebe and the truth. Those things were very important to her. She was a fighter, and I'm a fighter, and my dad's a fighter. But in terms of her memory, and just the fact that a finding like this can be made and people like us have no recall, we can't fight something that's so obviously wrong, I think we're as much doing this for everybody else as for ourselves.
And of course, if anyone knows anything more about Phoebe's death, please call Crime Stoppers on 1800 333 000. Thank you for joining me. I'm Liz Hayes. Good night. If anything in this program has raised concerns for you or someone you know, please contact Lifeline on 13 11 14 or lifeline.org.au. Hello, I'm Liz Hayes. Thanks for watching 60 Minutes Australia. Subscribe to our channel now for brand new stories and exclusive clips every week. And don't miss out on our extra minutes segments and full episodes of 60 Minutes on 9now.com.au and the 9Now app.